Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of On the Record. This time we have two very senior journalists with us who've been in the field, who've seen it all, who've covered politics, conflict, communal violence in the country for years and for decades. We have Pamela Philipose, who's a senior journalist, of course, and a researcher. She's currently a senior fellow at the Indian Council of Social Science Research and works and writes extensively. We have Vinod Sharma, political editor with the Hindustan Times. He's also been a journalist for over 3 decades. And like I said, has reported on daily news, current affairs, is a regular known face. Welcome both of you to this program. So Vinod, what do you feel that what was the first collapse in, while we covering, I know that we've been collapsing on rules and tenets for a long time now, but what do you think was the biggest casualty in media coverage emerging from this violence in Jahangirpuri?
Information. Honest dissemination of information, which is what fetches us the freedom, a derived freedom from the freedom of speech in our constitution.
Right.
And I think we are failing in that basic duty. And sooner or later, a time will come, I think it has already come, that somebody should go to the topmost court of this country and tell the court that the reasons for which the media has been bestowed these freedoms, that spirit of the constitution is being violated every day. We live by one book as citizens of this country. I refuse to get dragged into the interfaith debate or conflict of faith debate as to who am I by virtue of my birth. My single question is, are we being true to our grain as journalists? And we are not being true to our grain as journalists for the simple reason that we allow ourselves to be protagonists in the events that we cover, while we have just to be honest witnesses.
Right.
And recount our relative truths as we see them. No truth is universal, you'd agree, Seema. Every truth is relative. We are becoming protagonists. We are becoming players in the events that we are expected to witness and report honestly as per our relative truths. Now, your relative truth and my relative truth in a given situation may differ if we are both on the same spot, but are looking in different directions and watching different scenarios. But at the same time, we have to relate what we have seen honestly. And there are moments when you cannot, go by the archaic rules.
Right.
Oh, you have to be objective. That if you are seeing somebody, being objective in this situation is like asking a guy who's just shot a gun as to where did you fetch this gun from, So you have to just relate what you see. So you have to give a running commentary insofar real-time information is concerned. And when it comes to people like you and me, from the print side, traditionally the print people, we have to, at the end of the day, give our reader the next morning a more wholesome account of what we saw. No, that is not happening. What is actually happening is, the other day, actually, aajkal to gussa bhi nahi aata hai, rona aata hai. I saw a tweet by a prominent, allegedly a very prominent television anchor, asking and making light of what happened in Jahangirpuri and asking that if this is the number of bulldozers that we require to use, will we produce them domestically or would we import them from outside? And ironically, her question was answered just a couple of days later when the British Prime Minister posed on a GVB being produced in Gujarat. Now, the point is that what I am trying to say here is that this is a narrative which you see on the television channels and elsewhere. They have not authored this narrative.
Right.
They have been asked to read out of a script, and they do it in their own different ways.
Right.
And that is where I say that journalism today is controlled and navigated by people who matter.
Right. So, Pamela, one point which Vinod had made a little earlier just now is also that journalists are bound by one book, which is the Constitution of India. And it doesn't matter what your faith is, what it is, you keep that at home. One. Two, and that was the kind of a understanding and training that we all got as journalists. How important is that training in times today is one thing that I would like you to answer. We can start with that, yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I'm glad that Vinod highlighted the importance of information, because this is freedom of expression, which is inherent in the Constitution, and that we are all legatees of. And therefore, as print media, we were taught to actually ensure that this information that we trade in, because we are traders in information, that information has to go through a due process. It has to go by the tests of truth, balance, and also, its capacity not to damage, not to harm other people. So these were the kind of sort of sentinels by which we tried to do our work. But what has happened, I think we have seen a sea change in many ways. And in many ways, the print media is still trying to cleave to the old principles to a lesser or greater extent. I'm not talking of all print media, but most print media. On the other hand, you have something like television, which is expensive and which is difficult to run. And we understand the reasons why television prefers not to follow the due diligence. Television has decided that it is a money-making machine, and to make the money and to make the necessary cash to keep it running, you need to make your compromises with the establishment in many ways. So you're seeing a new model. And of course, all media post-liberalization saw a little bit of this commercialization coming into play. But here you're seeing a kind of model that is completely driven by the market and the market is linked to the government. So therefore, they will follow the government, that whatever the government wants to set down, they'll follow it carefully, and to the extent that they will try and be even holier than thou. They'll be even more committed to the agenda of the government than the government would even expect it to be. And we know that this government in particular is a very media conscious government. It understands the importance of information and the need to control the information in certain ways.
Right.
So we are actually in this crisis. It's staring us in the face, and once in a way it comes to the fore when a big story like the demolitions in Delhi happens.
Right. You had also spoken of this, Vinod, that about subjectivity and objectivity. And it was a question I remember when we were much younger and actively in the field. It used to confound us, right? And then we realized that there is nothing like objectivity. It is subjectivity for the poor, for the discriminated, for the harassed, for the victimized. And there is one truth which you go and you look for it. I want you to expand on this a little bit more, because this is a very important issue, and this is something that people who are actually not who are actually subjective throw on independent journalists.
They don't understand the dynamics of journalism. True. And they don't understand how can one be truthful to his audience or his readership. The other day on Twitter, I was responding to someone who was critical of what I was saying. And at the end of the little debate, on Twitter, I said, okay, goodbye and good night, and reminded of Ed Murrow, in the era of McCarthy. Now, I don't know whether they have heard of McCarthy, But what we are seeing today is another version of McCarthy, control of the media. You see, Pam used the word trader of information. Indeed, we have become traders today of information. We used to be purveyors of information. Seema, in a democracy, it's often said that you get the government you deserve because you vote for it. But now you also get the media you deserve because you refuse to pay for it.
Yeah, true.
You see, this is the biggest problem, that everybody wants free-to-air channel. Everybody wants a newspaper priced at 5 rupees, while the production cost is about 20 to 25 rupees. So our economies are virtually mortgaged to the big advertiser. And I agree with Pam when she says, free speech and free market are not compatible. In a free market, free speech is possible only when a media house is self-sustained. Take, for instance, the case of the Guardian newspaper. They have a Scott Foundation, which invests in various businesses, makes some profits, and plows those profits into the newspaper so that that newspaper can keep its character and editorial voice. No such experiment, barring perhaps Hindu, to some extent the Hindu, have we seen in our media. In our media jagat, or our media world, we have also had very influential owners who have said, we are not in the business of information, we are in the business of advertising. And so true, so prophetic. This was said many, many years back.
Yeah,
in an interview to New Yorker, if I'm not wrong. No? And it is coming so true that it looks prophetic. Now, the point is that where do we stand? Are we the fourth estate? Mr. Hamid Ansari, at a seminar organized by the Rajya Sabha, where Harish Kare was there and I was also there and a couple of other senior journalists were there, he made an opening remark and where he said something very telling and pertinent for you and me, at least, and Pam, people like us who come from the old school, we are now an extinct species. If we, people tend to sort of color us and say that they are the people who are, they have an agenda. And if truth is an agenda, indeed we have an agenda. You see, and our agenda is truth as we see the truth. Now, Hamid Ansari Saab said that out of the 4 pillars of democracy, the only pillar which is self-professedly profiteering is the media. And that is why there a greater responsibility comes on the media to be true to its word, to be true to its audience and its readership, because you are a profiteering pillar of the state. Now today, we are only a profiteering pillar of the state, largely. Honorable exceptions are there. We are only a profiteering pillar of the state with very little regard for the reasons for which we have these freedoms.
Right.
And whether these are freedom, whether those freedoms exist today or not is a different debate altogether.
Right. So earlier, we saw a long time, ever since actually television came, that there is this, what should we say, blackening out or dumbing down of the secular space or the secular voice. And every time there's a conflict or communal violence or something, extremists of all the communities were called by television to make a very spicy discussion in the evening. We didn't protest, it carried on for a while. Now you find that the anchors themselves have become the extremists and are taking positions for and in support of one or the other community. How does this work?
No, and
how is this going to work on us or for us in the media?
I think, Seema, you raised a very important point because you're talking about the format of how television information is put out.
Yeah.
And one of the formats that is the favored format is, of course, a chat show, which is the least expensive because all you have to do is to bring a couple of talking heads and get them to, yabber on. And that's what we see day in and day out. And our television viewer has become so used to this that they don't even ask for something better because this is actually replacing good quality information And what we are having is a second-hand, tripe that is thrown at us day in and day out. And the format used is adversarial in the sense that it pits one person against the other. But if you notice this pit, it's not balanced at all. And the whole idea of this so-called, it's a pretense balance that is being tried to be achieved. Actually, it's the anchor that, leads discussion and also very often adds to the negative nature of the discussion. And then at one point, one Muslim guest got up and said, "Why don't the Hindus kill all Muslims?" He said it in a moment of great distress. But instead of actually noticing that and trying to respond in an empathetic way to his distress, the anchor turns around and says, "Oh, the victim card." So you see, the thing is, the nature of this dialogue and the way it is guided is so toxic. And when you see the rise of, when did all this happen? And I think we have to go back in history. We have to go back to the days of Babri Masjid. We have to go back to the days of the big riots, whether it is the 1984 riot or the 2002 Gujarat riot. The point is, the Gujarat riots particularly, and it's a pogrom, I shouldn't use the word riots, but it's being used so loosely, so I will continue using it only to reach out to different types of viewers. Now, what happened after that particular event or set of events in Gujarat? What you had was the Modi figure emerging as the epitome of the Hindutva, person. He became the authoritarian figure, and he was allowed to become this, acquire a larger avatar by the media. And it's also his treatment of the media. He ensured that any media that questioned him would not have access to him. So why, for instance, has the Prime Minister never given a press conference? Because he wants the media narrative to follow his bidding. He doesn't want to be answerable to the media.
I just interrupt here, Pam. Any Prime Minister or a political party in power wants the media to do what it wants, right? It's always been so. Some have been more autocratic about it, some have been less at different points in history. The point is what we really need to understand is, why are we doing it? And why are we continuously doing it? And what is this whole fear? So one is, of course, the money angle that you have spoken of. You want to add to that also? Because the media is kowtowing, isn't it?
No, I'm just saying that access.
Yeah.
For the journalist, access is very important. The moment you cut access to the corridors of power, it means that your sources of information also dry up. So Modi realizes, as a prime minister, he realizes this, and you're quite right. Every prime minister in the world tries to get advantage of the media. Yeah. But this kind of very deliberate cutting off of information is, I think, very specific to this model of governance. And I think we should understand and note that.
What do you think, Vinod? You sort of...
Look, I have a different take on this. Frankly, to be a great journalist, or to be a journalist, or utilitarian journalist, to state the least for the people and my readers and my viewership constituency, I don't need any access to the Prime Minister. What I need is access to information. The worry is that the access to basic information today is being greatly controlled. And if you have access, then the quid pro quo is custom built to favor the giver of the access and not the taker of the access. And that is where much of the narrative is standardized. In this country, thought has been standardized on very, very complex issues. It is sought to be standardized. Frankly speaking, day before yesterday night, I was on a Twitter space and where the Insafiyas of Imran Khan, they were conducting the Twitter space. And when I tried to strike a different chord without rubbishing him at all, because people are turning out in huge numbers in his support, I said that, look, where he made a mistake was about not being within the four walls of the Constitution while registering his protest. Whatever words the Constitution of Pakistan is, they have a Constitution. And I was driven out of the Twitter space. Yesterday night, I was driven out of another Twitter space where everybody is repeating Rohingya, Rohingya, Rohingya. And I was telling them that the biggest threat to India is not Rohingya or in Jammu or in Kashmir. It is the cross-border terror. It is the radicalization of the youth inside Kashmir. And they were unhappy and they thought that I was misleading them and I was driven out of there. I was in fact blocked. Now the point is that truth is sought to be blocked. You have to set it free. And once upon a time, I was a critic of Arun Shourie, but today I'm an admirer. Because here is a man who's speaking the truth as he sees it, insofar as media's freedoms are concerned. And he the other day was saying that, look, you are faced with a force which has had a narrative not from now, but for many decades ago. And the Indian intellectual or Indian media has not acquired the intellectual wherewithal to resist it, counter it, and reply to it in a wholesome manner so that people have other point of view to choose from. So when thought is sought to be standardized so brazenly, for instance, the thought is sought to be standardized on the Muslim question. It is sought to be standardized on the Kashmir question. It is sought to be standardized on the secular question. And intellectuals are sought to be rubbished. इस देश में विद्वान होना अब गुनाह हो गया है. Intellectual has become an abuse. Now, what do you do in such a situation? The problem is that it is not as much a creation of the working journalist. It is a creation of the architecture, the journalistic architecture, the media architecture that we have in this country.
Right.
And we have been discussing that in the Editors Guild, and you people have been taking up those issues. But the reality is that the system is not supportive of honest journalism today. And when a young journalist comes in and he needs a job desperately, he's given a line and he follows that. And there is nobody to guide him the way we were guided by our seniors. I know how we were guided by our seniors. I know about myself. I've seen people like you in Patriot, when John Dayal and others, our seniors, they will guide us, They had their point of view, which they never foisted on us. So that culture, that work culture is no longer existing. अब जब snowfall ही नहीं हो रहा है, तो फिर आप सेब कहाँ से उगाओगे?
True. Wow. Pam, so that's, you wanted to say something.
No, Seema, the point is, and I think the relevant point in Vinod's argument is that the standardization of information, some of it is done with a purpose, and we are all victims of that, template that is being imposed on us. But here, I think we should also bring in the role of new media. And that is the emergence of social media. And the fact that you can create bubbles, you can create, followers far in excess of your actual physical presence. All these are new developments, and they segue directly into media information. So it's not as if old media is separate from new media. Internet is the bridge, and information flows from old media to new media, and new media to old media in a constant interaction. It's not in silos. So, and that is where we are talking about huge amounts of information flowing down cables of various kinds telling us what to think. And that's why the viewer, is already sort of pre-designed or pre-programmed to be receptive to certain media messages. And then you follow it up with media content that follows the general architecture.
Right. So I'm just going to ask both of you a last kind of a question. We'll go back to Vinod and then come to you, Pam. The impact. Now, there is an impact of all this. It's an impact on a loss of credibility. There's of journalists. There is impact on the polarization within the media. You're either one side or the other side. You're nothing in the middle. So truth has somewhere got lost in that. The truth that we are talking about, either we are supporting one or we are supporting the other, or we are tolerant of one or we are intolerant of the other. So that impact you can see in the media. You can also see, the credibility, the loss of respect for the media, which is evident when our reporters are out on the roads. I'm not talking about the ones who are politically attacked, but there is a certain, even when you go and ask people about anything, they say, "Are aap log to likhenge kahan, pooch kyun rahe ho?" That never really used to happen when we were young reporters. People loved us, gave us ganne ka ras, and gave us whatever they've eaten, our beto, that love, that embrace is all gone. Now, how is it going to impact on the future of journalists when journalists themselves are becoming pariahs? Vinod?
The biggest casualty of what's happening, Seema, is the public discourse, the vitiation of public discourse.
Yeah.
Look, it's the public discourse which tells you the character of a country. Like the state of the traffic on the roads tell you the character of a city.
Right.
Or the nature of a membership tells you the character of a club. The nature of public discourse in India today is not at all the kind of public discourse we used to see when leaders as powerful as today's leaders were in control. Take the case of Indira Gandhi. Take the case of how Indian Express in those periods used to challenge Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi as commerce. That was the headline of one of the articles which Arun Shourie wrote at that time on Indira Gandhi Pratibha Pratishthan, the trust which was set up by Antulay. And he would, he would take money to buy cement and all that, and that kind of journalism was happening and was allowed to happen. There was indeed the emergency period, and we saw that as much. But today, the restraints are not announced under the law or the provisions of the Constitution. An attempt is being made to give people a way of thought, and they are lapping it up like a way of life. And that way of life is not actually the way of life we deserve in this country. That perennially distrusting each other, opposing each other to the extent of being inimical, and losing patience and trust, and refusing to give each other the benefit of doubt. We are being trained. Say, you have talked about Babri Masjid. You are talking about Babri Masjid. Progressively, the word which was used for it was disputed structure. That is the lexicon which is first formulated to be injected into public discourse. I am a libtard. I am not a liberal. Secularist हूं मैं, secular नहीं हूं.
Restitute.
So, yes, and these expressions came from people holding constitutional positions. Now, you see, the point is that this discussion that we are having just now is a good platform to let out steam. I mean, to feel a little lighter on the chest, But the reality is that a journalist today lacks any credibility. Yes, there was a brief period during the Kisan movement when certain people who went there were received with open arms, and against certain others, there were placards hung. deriding them, sneering at them, and questioning their very honesty to be good journalists. So I think that a stage may come where, because journalism has become so deeply involved in the political processes over times, that people are going to think of us no different than politicians. They already don't think us of any different than politicians. And even if, and if they disagree with my truth, they will call me a congressman. If they disagree with someone else's truth, they will call him Vajpayee or a communist and all that. But the real impact is on public discourse and thereby on democracy, the nature of democracy that we are becoming.
Right. Pam, on the same issue.
No, I agree that the journalist as a figure has been denuded of power and of, even moral credibility. And of course, we were the first to critique it, and we are critiquing the behavior of our comrades and our colleagues and so on, because we understand that it is important to critically engage with this phenomenon of the denuded journalist. It's a terrible, terrible situation. But at the same time, and here as a part of Editors Guild, Seema, there are many, many journalists who are actually trying to do decent work and who have been attacked in so many ways, Recently, you had the incident of people in a town in Madhya Pradesh being stripped. Why do they want to do that? Why does the police want to do that? They want to do that in order to remove any bit of dignity that those people had. And they were doing credible, good stories. And that's why they, invited the wrath of the police and the establishment, because the police responds to the establishment and therefore takes action. And then you had one man being changed to a hospital bed after being roughed up in Orissa. Every state, we know that 55 odd people during the pandemic had all kinds of laws thrown against them. They were thrown into jail, they lost their jobs. And these are good people. These were people who wanted to hold on to that fourth estate, wanted to be a pillar, of democracy in this country, but were not allowed to do so. And so what I worry about is not just the nature of journalism and how it's changing journalists' work, but also the nature of the public response to the journalist. And if they allow their police to actually finish off journalists for writing the truth, then it means that, like Vinod says, that they get the media that they deserve, which is a voiceless media. And how do we protect our journalists even as we critique our journalists? That is the bigger question, I think, that faces us in the future. Wherever they are, whether they are practicing as an online or on television or on print, in print, they need to have the protection of society. And somehow civil society has not seen the need to speak up for journalism, although it is so important. The links that good journalism has to the health of civil society is so clear. But yet we have not seen people coming out on the streets fighting for journalism. Have we? Have you ever seen that? It's seen as an archaic or arcane issue that we should not bother about. But it's changing a little bit. In Karnataka, for instance, after the horrible way in which the hijab, issue played out, and how young girls were hounded by journalists, you had hate speech Veda. We don't want hate speech come out of civil society. And they knew that journalism was very important for clamping down on hate speech. They went to newspaper offices and television offices and said, what are you doing? They exposed them. And it's that we need that kind of awakening in society to actually change the nature of discourse on journalism, whichever kind of journalism it is. You know, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, thank you. This has been very informative. And I think what has really been underlined by both of you, Pamela and Vinod, is the kind of challenges that we are facing and the kind of future we are looking at, which is a bleak present, but could be a bleaker future if the institution of journalism, as the fourth pillar of democracy, is completely reduced to rabble. And it seems, while there are some checks and balances, they are getting weaker by the day. It is becoming more and more difficult for journalists to come together and protect what they have, as the voice that is demolishing it, and that is also coming from within so-called newsrooms, is getting shriller, louder, and more one-sided. So thank you so much for giving this time. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for having us, Seema.
Bye.